So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alessandro. I'm the Research Development Manager for Translation and Health Innovation at the university, where I manage Translation Manchester and this funding call. And together with me today is Professor Sam Butterworth, Professor of Medicinal Chemistry at the university and Academic Lead of the IAA, and Sally, who is our Translation and Research Support Officer. So today, hopefully, we'll be able to tell you a little bit more about this funding call, Confidence for Translation. We want to keep our presentation a minimum, maybe 20 to 30 minutes, to tell you a little bit about the call, the remit, and Sam is going to give some useful tips on how to put in a competitive funding application. We'll also tell you a little bit more about what's new in 2005. So we've been running this scheme for a number of years now in several different forms, but every year there is some differences. So I'll try to highlight those for your benefits in case you have applied in the past. But then really we'll try to leave at least half of this meeting open for questions from you. Any question about eligibility, about the process, about again, if you have any question about your particular projects. The session is being recorded, so if you're asking any question, keep that in mind for confidentiality issue. If you need to ask any question that is not appropriate to us during this meeting, reach out to me separately after this call and we can take that offline. But I think without further ado, let's start with the main agenda topic, which is the Confidence for Translation call. So as I just mentioned, we've been running this for a number of years. It used to be run as Confidence in Concept, funded by the MRC originally. Then we had Project for Translation funded by the Wellcome Trust Translational Partnership Award, which has recently ended. And a couple of years ago, we merged them into a unified scheme, also including some funding from the BRC, and that became Confidence for Translation. Is a proof of concept type of call, is internal. The funding comes for this particular call or for the MRC Impact Accelerator account. It really is to help you unlock translational bottlenecks. So it's not for traditional research projects. We want you to have a translational vision. We want you to be developing a product, an intervention, a change of service that will really make a difference into for patients. However, we don't define the stage at which you are in your research. So you can be as early as at the beginning of your translational journey or as late as in patient-centered research. What's important is that you're experiencing a bottleneck and you're applying for internal funding to go ahead and risk your project for external funding. So we fund anything such as, those are just example, prototype manufacturing, proof of concept, collaborating with the industry. We provide up to 75K. We are looking to fund projects between 6 and 9 months in duration. There is exception to this, which we can discuss in the Q&A session, but ultimately is short, focused projects that are focused on unlocking a particular bottleneck that will allow you to de-risk the project and apply for follow-on funding. We're looking at follow-on funding, things like the MRC developmental pathway or NIHR schemes such as the PDA, HTA, and so on. As part of this C4T call, we're also accepting application for access to expertise type of projects. HUE was a funding scheme that we ran up until last year. Essentially, it gives you an opportunity to engage with external consultants or external companies to buy in their service as a service, so rather than a collaboration. So you're allowed to apply for activity of this type as part of this C4T call. And normally you would be funding a salary for one of your postdocs. We do not fund PI salary, but you can find a postdoc and some consumables. That's the most generic type of projects that we get. But we're open to hear what you need in order to unlock your translational bottleneck. What we do not fund is attendance to conferences or publication costs. Those are not in remit for this particular scheme. We would consider training if it was essential to them to the project, or exchange visits with collaborators. That's also possible. But if you're in doubt on whether a cost is eligible or not, reach out to us or ask at the end of this call, and we are happy to answer any question. Also, I should have said, if you've got any question now, you can put them in the chat and we'll pick them up at the end of the presentation as well. And Sam will cover a lot of these things as well during his talk in a minute. So in terms of that translational pathway that I mentioned before, As I said, we aim to fund projects at any stage of this translational pathway. We wouldn't normally fund the one projects that were focused on gaining knowledge unless there was a translational vision, and that was set out very well within the the research proposal. Normally, the majority of our project sits within that stage between D3, which is a proof of concept, and T1, when you first have a first-in-man test of your intervention. But as I said, any stage is really welcome to apply. And we will discuss a bit about the remit later on in the Q&A session. So in terms of timelines, the call has been open a couple of weeks now. We have the workshop today, and the deadline is the 5th of November. However, very importantly, there is a deadline for you to contact your research support managers and officers to let them know you're applying, to give them enough time to put together the costings, which is another new thing from this year. So that deadline is the 6th of October. So that means that you need to at least reach out to your research support manager to let them know you're going to apply. And I believe they will ask you to submit a research costing request form because these projects need to be costed fully at the application stage. In terms of timeline after your application, we will peer review proposals between now and Christmas with a view of hosting a panel in January and let applicants know about outcomes early in February, with projects starting shortly after. So this is the timeline so that you know what to expect in terms of funding decision from us. A little bit more about what's new this year. So I think I mentioned this earlier. All the proposals are to be funded by the Medical Research Council Impact Accelerator account. The full costing, I also mentioned this, needs to be provided by research services for all proposals, and you need to allow time for that to happen. And again, from this year, we do require your head of school or head of department division to sign off the proposals, because we only fund directly incurred costs only. And although the directly allocated costs are waived at an institutional level, we need to make sure that your head of school, head of division is aware of that waiver for this particular proposal. We also have something else new this year, which is an additional form, which is called subcontracting and collaboration form. So this is for any proposals in which you are collaborating with external parties, without being an NHS partner or an industry partner, another a higher education institution, and also if it's non-financial. So if there is a collaboration, it's likely to require a collaboration agreement, financial or not, or maybe like a simple confidentiality agreement. So because of the time that it's required to set up those type of contracts, we want to acquire as much information as we can before you're successful in securing the award, and that will allow us to hopefully, after the money is awarded, to process your contracts faster so that the project can start right away. So if you have any external collaboration, please do submit this form as well as the application form, which is new for this year. And another thing that will be important this year is that you really put a lot of emphasis in feasibility during the timelines, because we have a strict timeline for spending. The award ends in March 2027. We will not have much opportunity to grant extension to successful proposal. So we do really want you to make a plan, a realistic plan to finish within the timelines, which is the 6 to 9 months from the start of the project. So I think that's everything I needed to say. Sam, if you want to start with your do and don'ts, that would be great.
Thank you, Alessandro. So yeah, thank you all for coming to the workshop. So this purpose of the next part is just to give you some experience from the panel over the last however long, 10 years I've been doing this, in terms of the sorts of mistakes perhaps we see in applications that don't help us as a panel to, I guess, see the quality in some of the projects. Or, you know, perhaps it's a slight mindset change for people moving from writing more conventional academic grant applications to more sort of translational funding applications. Again, if any of this needs clarifying or you want any follow-up information, you're very happy to drop questions in the chat and we'll pick them up afterwards. So making a start then. So what we're looking for here is projects which have the potential to, in the medium to long term, go on to benefit patients and improve healthcare in the UK and across worldwide. And so what we're looking for here is projects which have the capacity to go on and make a difference in that context. It's very unlikely with the amount of money we're funding that we're going to fund a piece of work that's going to really demonstrate the feasibility of an approach or really do even more than a tiny bit of the work that's going to be required to translate an idea. And so what we're really looking for is to fund those key risks that are stopping projects from progressing on to either larger funding applications or collaborations or whatever the next stage of that project is going to be. So in order for us to support the project, we really need to understand that it has some unique advantage in approaching the problem which it's seeking to address, whether that's a new drug or a new device, a new diagnostic, a new even approach towards a talking therapy, whatever it might be. We need to understand why this approach has the potential to be superior to what's currently used for the management of patients, and indeed what is likely to be coming. So some consideration of not just what's available now, but what is in development, what other competing approaches there are. It's really important in order to really sell why this is an attractive project. In selling that concept, you don't have space in the form to sell two ideas. So if you're developing something which might have more than one application, you really have to pick the best application that you have now and explain to us what's the unmet need in that area. You don't have time to talk about two different disease spaces, for example, even if they're quite closely related. And that will be true for any subsequent follow-up applications you do, larger applications to MSE, etc. So focusing on what you think is the single most beneficial application of your project is really important. So moving to the next slide, please, Alessandro. So what do we talk about when we're talking about these key risks that you might address? Really, we're looking for small things, I mean, relatively small things that you don't understand now, which need to be true for this project to have the capacity to move further forwards. And the reason for this is that this award was actually set up by MRC in response to their DPFS application scheme, where people were coming with grant applications for millions of pounds, and they're saying this is really interesting, but actually this project might die with the first £50,000 when they've done this killer experiment, and if that doesn't work, the rest of the money is not useful. And so we're really looking to find those potential weaknesses in projects that are preventing them from making progress, emerging typically from kind of academic research towards more translational research, and address those problems where we can. So we accept in that there's going to be some degree of risk. We want to fund work where actually, yes, if this works, there's really clearly a path forwards, but actually it might not work. If there's no kind of risk associated with the project, it almost doesn't really fit with the scheme very well. So one way of thinking about identifying the key hurdles for a project is this thing: what are the most awkward questions you could be asked when you're writing a grant application, when you're thinking about the next translational step? What's the thing you're most worried about? What's the thing that you think actually is the highest risk part of the project? And hopefully that will help you focus your application on addressing those biggest risks. As part of that, you need to be considering what we call this line of sight to patients. So from where you are now to your project intervention, whatever it might be, ultimately being used in patients, what are the key gaps? What are the things that need to be true or that you don't understand that are going to allow you to build a bridge from where you are to ultimately to utilization? So again, we know that we are only funding a small part of these projects, but the project needs to have a path forwards. If there's no real way to ultimately deploy this approach, even if it looks very promising now, it might make it very difficult for us as a panel to prioritize that project over something else where there is a clearer line of sight. The path into patients is more obvious. So if you need a $50 billion scanner, of which there's only one in the world in China, it's very unlikely that that's going to be a useful way to diagnose patients in the sort of medium term, for example. And just to reiterate that point around the risk, if your project doesn't address risk, if it's just an incremental stage on a project, like for example, scaling something that could just be the first work package in a large grant application that really isn't going to carry any risk in doing so, then the panel are unlikely to view that as favorably as a more kind of risk addressing project. So as I mentioned, almost certainly the outcome of this grant will hopefully be a data set that helps you to apply for further funding. So thinking about what those further funding options are is useful. MRC DPFS is one, but there are lots of other paths forwards that could involve partners. There is no commercial incentive in these projects. We'll mention IP a few times, but we're not looking for projects that have potential to go on to make money necessarily, but there does need to be a credible path forwards to the next stage and ultimately to patient benefit. One thing that can come across really powerfully in these applications, if you have applied to MRC DPFS or another translational funding stream and you have feedback that you maybe are able to address with this application, it's worth mentioning that and helping us understand, that the funders have actually requested this kind of study. It does sometimes happen. To the previous point around making money from these things, there doesn't have to be a commercial case, but there has to be a clear path to exploiting what you find. Same would be true for the MRC DPFS scheme, which means you do have to have freedom to exploit your innovation. If you're working with a technology that's owned by a third party, and whether that's a drug or a device or whatever it might be, there's a risk, of course, then that the third party might stop trading or may have a change of strategy and not be interested in working with you. And so any project that is relying on third party IP, I think A, inherently carries more risk, and B, there needs to be a really clear understanding of how that project is going to progress with the third party, and what options you might have for continuing the project if the third party was no longer interested. So that comes on to the forms you might need to complete with if you're working with external partners. The application shouldn't be written for a very specialized audience. So we have a panel of both academic and external translational experts. We have experience across digital health, diagnostics, pharmaceuticals, etc. But they're unlikely to be specialized in your specific area that you're working in. So the application needs to be written in a language that is interpretable by a kind of a translational specialist, but someone who probably doesn't have kind of deep scientific understanding of the area you're working in. And we do like to see figures and preliminary data. I think, again, if a project like this, of this size, if it's going to really unlock larger funding, you probably need to have quite a significant amount of data available now that has convinced you and can convince us that this is a good idea, and why you now need this next kind of piece of experimental work or whatever it is to bridge the gap to the next funding. So it's great to have some data in there to support that. And it can really help, I think, convince the panel that this is a project that's worth pursuing. But that data does need to show something, just a catchy figure that says, yeah, this is going to be amazing. Obviously we're all scientists. We'll look at that and go, okay, but what does that mean? Where's the evidence? So try and make those any figures you include directly relevant to the evidence you have for why this is a good approach. So strong proposals then tend to identify these clear bottlenecks in projects. So they have, believable preliminary data, a clear potential, advantage in a pathway to treatment of patients or patient benefit, but have clearly identified this bottleneck, and the panel believe that bottleneck has been appropriately identified, and that addressing this bottleneck will make a demonstrable shift in the translational pathway. It will affect the risk of the project. We like to see clear and specific objectives with associated milestones. So we don't part fund here. We don't look to withdraw funding, but again, clear understanding of what you need to achieve in order to have a go, no go decision at the project can really help us understand your thinking around what you need to see. So saying, yeah, if this is going to be successful, these things have to be true. This is the target we're aiming at. We can do the experiments to prove that. And if we fall below that, we know this is perhaps unlikely to work. So having those kind of clear milestones in there can help us understand what you're trying to achieve, and then associate the experimental plan to addressing those milestones. The obviously clear vision for translational potential now, but also in the longer term that there is a path forwards and that the following funding options have been identified and considered. That you have clarity on the IP situation. Again, if you're not sure, that's a chance to maybe engage with the Innovation Factory. Often projects that we fund already have some relationship with the Innovation Factory, and we have Innovation Factory representatives on the panel. So again, we're not looking to fund projects only that have commercial potential, but there needs to be a clarity around the IP. The project team hopefully has all the key personnel required and the expertise needed. Again, in translational work, it's very rare that one individual, no matter how expert they are in their area, knows everything that's needed to take a project forward. So we're often looking at teams at this stage of projects, looking to take ideas forwards, ideally potentially with some clinical input, often to help understand how that project actually relates clearly to the clinical situation. And we need to have those licenses to third-party technology and ethical approval either in place or with a very clear plan. Ethics is one of the big problems we have. Projects that require significant progress in the ethical approval at the point of application. They do inherently carry more risk because, as Alessandro mentioned, we have a spending deadline on this, and we've had a few examples over the years of projects that have ended up parked for extended periods of time while ethics has been arranged. So if your project does require ethics, obviously it's important to say that. Occasionally as well, we have someone come forward and go, well, we don't need ethics for this. And you're like, that seems unlikely. So be honest, but make sure you have a clear plan in place if ethics is required. So common mistakes, any project that really lacks translational focus is unlikely to do well. So if it looks like this is just a continuation of a research project, it's kind of the fact finding, data generating without really being focused on clear milestones that need to be achieved, then I think that's likely to look maybe a bit too early for the panel. Like this probably needs a little bit more academic funding before the real translational goals have been identified. A lack of technical details can be a problem. So all of our panel members, everyone who sees your application will either be Manchester staff or under a CDA. So you can include any data in there without worrying about external disclosures or anything. And a lack of technical detail in the application can be a real problem in terms of helping the panel understand why this is a good idea. If you have expertise lacking from the team, that can be a problem. If you know there's aspects of this project that you don't have the expertise in the team at the moment to address, then I would encourage you to look to bring in people who maybe do have that expertise. And I'm sure Alessandro can help you make those connections, or others if you're unsure. Hope you don't mind me signing up for that, Alessandro. If you have study design or sample sizes are not well justified, then that can be a problem. So why do you need to do this many / perhaps more typically, is this many going to be enough actually to provide a compelling data set? Okay, this is going to be interesting, but at the end, you're still going to need to do another larger study before really you're going to have a believable data set. So the sample sizes have to be well justified. If the plan itself looks very over optimistic, then obviously that might get flagged up in the panel as being a risk. That's not to say that you should be ambitious in what you're trying to achieve, but if the pathway to getting there looks very ambitious for the amount of resource you have, then obviously that creates a different type of a risk. And likewise, if the costs or time commitment is not justified on projects, we do occasionally see one where someone's got like 9 months of a postdoc, and you look at what they're going to do, and you're thinking that's not 9 months of a postdoc's work to get through that. So yeah, apply for what you need to address the question. If you try and pad the project out too much to fill up time, it may not look that good in the panel. If your milestones are not measurable or don't really fit with what you're trying to achieve, that can be a problem. Like I said, those milestones are not being held against you in anger. They're about us attempting to or being able to understand what you need to achieve and to help you to think about what you need to achieve for the project to be a success. And a big one, and particularly, I don't know who's on the call, so I haven't had a look through the names, but big issue, particularly for digital health type projects, is a insufficient consideration of the competition. So what else is actually going on in this space, both currently in terms of how patients are treated, but also coming through the development path. If you're working in an area where there is significant competition, then you need to address that, because if we can go and have a look and see someone else is doing something very similar to you and is much more advanced, and panel members and reviewers are likely to have a bit of a look around your application, then that can obviously leave you with what may look like a weak application, even if you know you've got a real clear advantage over that approach. If you don't tell us, we won't know what that is. So a very brief summary, and then we can go to questions. So, the aim of your proposal then is to articulate to us what is the underpinning problem or need. Why is a new thing that you're doing required in order to improve, patient outcomes or patient experience? You need to be able to tell us where you are now, what you know that's convinced you that this is a good idea, and what is the key gap that you need to address in order to unlock the translational pathway for this project. You need to be able to articulate to us exactly what you're going to achieve with this project. And in light of that first comment, articulate the underpinning problem or need in terms of not just where we are now, but what are the alternative solutions either available now or under development, and why yours is better. It's worth thinking about the risks to the project and how they will be managed. Again, we will be selecting a subset of projects. I'm sure all of the projects that come in will have some really interesting science behind them and potential to go forwards. We'll only be able to fund a subset of them, and so projects that look like they're carrying a lot of risk, not in terms of like over ambitious in terms of what they're trying to achieve, but in terms of actually the risk of the structure of the project can be a problem. Things like third-party IP, for example, being one of those, or very ambitious work plans. And then obviously, we need to understand the long-term translational plan, in particular in terms of follow-on funding and other options. Great. So hopefully you found that useful. You've had a chance to have a look at the form. And so we can go to the chat and address some of the questions that are coming through now. If anyone else has any questions, please put them in the chat. You're very welcome also to come on off mute and ask them. We'll see how many questions we get, and then we'll think about next steps. So we've got one question now already around how many projects do we plan to fund? Alessandro, do you have the numbers on the top of your head?
Yeah, so I think, excuse me, I think we're hoping to, we're looking at funding at least 5 projects. However, during the panel, if some projects come at a lower budget, sometimes it's possible to fund more, but definitely at least 5.
Yeah, I mean, it's a slightly smaller perhaps than rounds have been in previous years, which is one of the reasons why we're doing a one-stage application process. But I guess we just don't know how many applications we're going to get. So hopefully it won't be too brutal, but yes, you never
So
know.
it's been quite consistent over the years. So with a like a 10%, 5 to 10% success rate, I would say. I can
Is
also,
the 6th of October deadline movable?
so yeah, I'm happy to get that question as well. So this is just the RSM. So the deadline is just for you to get in touch with your research support manager, research support officer, and let them know that you're applying for it. So technically, you could send them an email today, if you're planning to apply. We don't monitor this deadline, but if you reach out to your research services contact after this deadline, they might say that there is not enough time for costing the proposal. So that's the answer to that, I think.
Cool. Yeah, so I would just start the dialogue as soon as possible. I think basically is that we flipped around how we do these costings, and it's difficult to get it right. If you do, too late causes problems, too early causes problems. But the conclusion is definitely this time we need those costings in place. So the contacts would be great. And then another question around the project duration. So if the project is 9 months, would it be possible to run from the 1st of June to the 28th of February, 9 months, or does the project have to start in March? So I would say there's two answers to that question. Alessandro can maybe give another answer. Strictly speaking, it wouldn't be a disaster potentially. However, it would leave us with zero slippage time, basically, right? So any delays in the project setup there, whether it's a recruitment delay or any delays with ethics or anything at all, would effectively render that project non-viable. So I think if there is some reason why you want to start slightly after March, I think it would have to come with a very convincing argument about why you're certain there won't be any slippage in the project timelines. Alessandro, would you have a different answer to that, or is that?
I think that's the answer I would have given. Like if you start late and the feasibility is still saying that you're definitely gonna finish by that time, I think I see no problem. But if the content of the proposal makes raises some doubts on feasibility, then I'd say it's better if you start earlier than later. So the content of the proposal will define the answer to that question, I think.
Um, so next question, can all the funding sought be used for the work of a subcontractor? The answer to that is yes, if it's justified. We're very happy to fund external work. Sometimes we have definitely done that in the past where there's reasons. We've seen the same with even through to the MRC DPFS level projects. So that's definitely okay. Again, as long as you can explain why that's the right thing to be doing and why that's the right approach. Yeah, Alessandro,
Also, yeah,
comment?
just to add that um, if the subcontractor is actually a collaborator rather than a subcontractor, so you're collaborating with an industry partner with work undergoing there, so for the funding to go there, you just need to be careful that the funding goes towards something that benefits the university rather than the industry partner. But if it's like a service being provided, then that's fine. It's just when it's a collaboration, you need to be careful that the IP be developed stays within the university. I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
No, that's a really good point. Yeah, we have seen applications where the money's gone to someone else who's a co-owner of the IP rather
Yeah,
than a genuine subcontract. Yeah. So I think again, feel free to jump back on and ask any follow-up questions. But yeah,
yeah.
certainly if this is a kind of conventional CRO type subcontract, that would be fine. The access to expertise scheme, I think Alessandro is just effectively rolled in here, right? Is that the
That's right. So there is no separate HOE call this year, but you can apply for HOE style projects within the C4T call. And it can also be a mixed thing by which you access expertise and then you conduct some work internally.
Um, can we have a co-PI being a postdoc? Um, Alessandro, do you have any rules around that?
It depends. If you are seeking for the salary for said postdoc, then you're better off putting them as a name researcher because we don't fund directly allocated costs. Also, is an internal scheme, so there is no credit share as such. So it doesn't really matter. The answer to that is, but technically, yes, you can put multiple PI, co-I. If you want to fund the salary of one of those, they can be co-I.
Mhm. And
That's
again, I think that I might build into that if there's an expertise that postdoc has that's particularly important for the project, etc. You know, and they're part of the team, then again, having them as a co-PI or co-I might be useful. But yeah, as to Alessandro's point, in terms of both salary payment and also credit share, it's to some extent really what's important for us is that you can show to us that you've got the right expertise on the team to deliver the project, right? That's more important to us than career stage, really. Can researchers make more than one application? I think, I mean, I think the answer to that can be yes. I would obviously, if those two applications are on closely related aspects of the same project, you'd have a problem. If they're on very distinct projects with different collaborators, you know, with different background information, then I don't think we have a rule that says you can't be a co-PI on more than one project. Is that right, Alessandro?
That's right. You can be co-I on as many as you want, but you can be PI only on one.
Yeah.
So I think if you're applying for multiple proposal, in one of them you'll be PI, in the others you'll be co-I. I know, so work around that.
Yeah. Again, I think to Alessandro's point, I think the delivering the results from the project and taking them on and further down the translational pathway is more important than who's the co-I or the PI on projects typically, right? We don't look at that because they're anonymized anyway. So it's about getting the right expertise together. So yeah, if you can split them up with your collaborators, then that should be fine. So there's one about risks. Can you explain a bit more about risks are to be considered for convincing the panel or could otherwise be red flags? I'm not sure what word exactly that means. I think the sorts of risks we're looking to address are kind of, you know, they relate more to knowledge gaps, like I tried to say, like things that have to be true for this project to be progressed further. So what is the data that you're missing that enables you to address those key translational risks in the project? So for example, in a diagnostic project, you might have a convincing signal from an initial cohort of patients, but that signal needs to be revalidated in a larger cohort before you can go for, you know, in a larger independent cohort before you can go on. Or you've got some data on a smaller number of samples, but you need a larger number to really get convincing data, or you have a proof of concept in a format that isn't going to be translationally relevant, and you need to move that into a different format, perhaps a different device or a different approach. Or, you know, for therapeutic projects that you have some additional data that suggests that the approach you're taking is going to be useful, but you're missing, you know, perhaps proof of efficacy in animals or some understanding of something that, you know, when you apply for the next funding application, you're likely to lose that. So the risk then is that, of course, the reason why you need that data is that it may not actually look as good. You know, we've funded quite a few diagnostics projects, for example, that had very promising preliminary data and that just didn't revalidate in the larger cohort, and those projects stopped. You know, so that was a risk that we were happy to take on. Obviously, we don't want all the projects to fail, but it's fine that some do. So the sorts of risks I was talking about that are less positive are more like delivery risks. Like, actually, are you going to be able to get enough patient samples in order to address that question? Okay, we need it in another 100, but sat here now, we've only got 20 and we're hoping to get the rest from somewhere else. Those kind of delivery risks, or you're working on a very ambitious timeline. And that's where some of those external CRO costs, contract research costs, can actually be quite a good way to deliver projects, because actually they are lower risk than establishing models within the university, you know, with the associated staffing and other potential issues. Hopefully that answers the question. If not, please feel free to ask again. Are applications with no preliminary data automatically excluded? I think it would be, my guess is we've never funded one. I think it would be hard to convince the panel that your project was, I can't think of a type of project where the project is advanced enough that it's really ready to unlock significant funding, where you have a really clear understanding of what the advantages of this, why this approach is kind of feasible, but haven't done any work yet or don't have any data yet to suggest that that's the case. If it's still just at an idea stage, I think it's likely to be too early. If you have a particular example that you think is relevant, then I would suggest you contact Alessandro and we can have a look at it in advance and give you some feedback before you write a full application. We're certainly not trying to exclude anyone. You know, all we're trying to do is fund the best projects, have the best chance of making progress. So if you have a really, really good idea that somehow means what I've just said isn't the case, then we'd be happy to look at it. But equally, we don't want to waste your time or our reviewers' time looking at things that have no realistic prospect of being funded. So we'll try and give you some feedback offline. When collaborating with an NHS trust, is there a required minimum percentage of University of Manchester staff involvement? Alessandro, do you have an answer to that?
So obviously the lead PI has to be a University of Manchester member of staff or honorary staff, but then and it needs to lead the project. But I don't think there is a minimum percentage of their time that needs to go towards the project itself. As soon as that person is our point of contact and leading the research program. I don't think there is a limit in terms of time.
Yeah.
That would be my answer, I think.
Great. Hopefully that answered the question. The presentation, yeah, we will make the presentation available. We're bemoaning the lack of communication streams at the moment, but we'll make it available in email. Make it clear that that is available. We
I
have no
think
sign up.
it will be on the web page where you download the application forms. So I don't, because we didn't get registration details for this meeting, we can't send that out via email. But if you visit the page, I would say within a couple of days, the video and the presentation will be available on the web page. Sorry, sorry, Sam.
No, that's perfect. Yeah, thank you. The proof of concept, does it need preliminary data or is published evidence will do? I mean, if that's your own published evidence, then that's probably a good thing. The it doesn't necessarily need to be sort of proprietary, as in, undisclosed preliminary data. If that preliminary data is someone else's publication, I guess the obvious question is why are you the right person to follow up on this, not them, when everyone else in the world knows this thing now as well as you? What's your advantage that means you can take this on? So it might be that actually, okay, we found that you can do this thing, and this paper tells us that this thing over there should be useful, and so we want to demonstrate. So we've done projects like that, for example, where we've been developing a drug for one purpose. There's a publication suggesting that actually a drug with that mechanism should be more useful in this other indication, and so we want to take that drug into a model of that other indication to prove it's going to work. So using a mixture of our own and external preliminary data to suggest something is worth doing. So that kind of approach would make sense. If it's just purely, I've read this paper and that looks interesting and we want to have a go at it, then again, you'd have to have a really convincing case why you were going to be able to do this and get ahead of everyone else who's also been able to read the paper. Are there any restrictions on overseas collaborations? Are these permitted? Co-inventors from external universities? Yeah. We don't say no to that. The IP, there's the two parts of that, I think, to answer the question around sort of non-University of Manchester adventures and co-development. One is around that. What is the translational path forwards for this? What and ultimately, if we spend this money on a project that ultimately is owned fully or partly by another partner, and they don't want to continue, then what is going to be the potential for the University of Manchester academics to take the project forwards? So I think there needs to be clear evidence that there's a path forwards for that collaboration beyond just the next year, but through the next 5 or 10 years or whatever. And then the other one is that, of course, the IP that's being developed will belong to the University of Manchester. So that whatever advances you make, the agreements would have to be that advance is owned by Manchester, not by the collaborator, whether that's an industrial or an academic collaborator. So again, here the goal isn't to have a commercial advantage. The goal is to make sure that we're not funding projects that ultimately hit a block at the next stage because the IP rights are too uncertain. So again, if you're not sure, I would maybe contact Alessandro and we can have a look at the case specifically. It is something that comes up in most rounds, I think. Will you need to lead on any contract collaborate with an NHS? Securing funding, the likelihood of project start. So that's the comment. A comment about who's going to do the contracting. So I'll read that out. Will your University of Manchester need to lead on any required contracting with collaborators? If collaborating with an NHS trust and additional third parties, would complexity of contracting affect the chances of securing funding, e.g., the likelihood of delays preventing the project start? Well, I think there's two parts to that. One is that we've got this contracting form that would need to be completed, and so that we'd have to have some clarity on what contracts were required up front and that is feasible in the timelines. Obviously, they carry some risk. In terms of whether it would affect the chances of funding, I think very unlikely to. I would imagine it's, we try and probably do a quality threshold. So as long as the contracting looks feasible, likely, not just feasible, but very, very likely to be sorted out, then I don't think it would affect the actual rankings significantly. Alessandro, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that's perfect answer. The only thing that it would affect is the feasibility within the timelines. If you're saying that you're gonna start the project in February and it's gonna last 9 months, and you don't allow any time for those contracts to be in place, and all the work depends on that contract being signed, then there is a problem because you've not taken into account the time that it might take to sign the contract. The reason why we asked that subcontracting form, because we are aiming to have all the contracts signed within the month. We were assured that that's possible. However, you know how it goes with contracts sometimes. So fill in that form, and if you've got any question, you can reach out to me or actually to the contracts team directly. They're happy to answer any question or pre-application. So the contact details that are on the application brief by Shemos Buyers that deals with all the contracts for C4T. So by all means, if you have any doubt on feasibility of signing this contract in time with multiple parties involved, reach out to Shemos and have a conversation even before applying. I think that's it.
Great, thank you. So I
Good.
don't think we've had any more questions come through. I'll give it maybe a few seconds just in case anyone wants to drop any last ones in. Otherwise, yeah, the slides will be online. There's also a bit of a walkthrough in the slide that they'll put online of the application questions. So, but hopefully it's reasonably self-explanatory. You're welcome to go and look at those. Obviously, if anything comes up after this that occurs to you or as you're working through things, then yeah, please contact Alessandro and we'll try and route things through. Is there likely to be future calls? So this is the so the IAA was originally a 3-year award. So confidence in concept, which is what predated the IAA, has been running now for 12, 13, 14 years probably, with funding from the MRC that became the IAA about 5 years ago as part of the integrated IAA scheme. I know that the MRC are very committed to translational research as part of their overall portfolio. They've opened up this gap fund scheme now, but everything I've ever heard from them indicates that they see the IAAs as being an important part of that translational landscape for the for the MRC research area. The IAA was originally meant to be for 3 years, but because of governmental chaos and other things, that's down. We've had sort of effectively 2 costed extensions to that award, of which this is the second. So in theory, we should now be in year 2 of the second round of the IAAs, but instead we're still in extension 2 of the first round. So we are anticipating a call for a new institutional IAA program to come out in the near future. We are anticipating applying to that, and in previous years, Manchester has always received funding. So all things being equal, we would expect there to be future calls, but we do not have any guarantee sat here today of any future funding rounds. So it will be time will tell. My guess is we can't rule out possibly another costed extension either, depending on how good how well informed the budgets are at UKRI. Yeah. Sorry, it was a very long answer, but hopefully you understand where we are. Great. Okay, so like I said, in the absence of any further questions, Alessandro, I'll just hand back unless you've got any final comments. But no, thank you for your time today. We look forward to seeing some really good applications, and hopefully we can fund some really exciting projects. And apologies in advance to anyone who does apply and isn't funded. Hopefully the feedback will still be useful. We try and give people effectively unfiltered feedback as much as possible so that you can see. Apologies again if the feedback isn't useful, but it's intended to be as much as possible. So thank you.